All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Let's get started. So I'm Brian. I'm going to be your host for the next hour for a little webinar on leading virtual teams and meetings. And just for context, so a lot of what I'm about to share about this came from, I don't know, 15 years now pursuing self-management. Although my goal for this talk is not to limit it to that at all. I've learned a lot about just in general leading virtual teams and meetings. My company, Holacracy One, for the past 12 years has been entirely virtual. And even before that, I was doing a lot of experimentation with how do we run more effective meetings. So my goal is to leave you with insights that apply to any kind of management structure. In fact, in many ways, I think self-management, rather than being something opposed to management, is a logical extension of good management. I think when you start pursuing really good management, you start finding more ways to empower your team. Good managers don't micromanage, they create clarity and structure and empower. And you take that to its logical conclusion and you end up with a self-management structure. So I think a lot of the insights and wisdom that we've learned over the years doing self-management are really applicable even in a management hierarchy. And then for those of you who are doing some form of self-management, but not holacracy, I also think there's plenty of tips here that are useful way beyond the holacracy world. In fact, this webinar is probably meant least for those of you who are already regularly doing holacracy, which is obviously my background. If you found this through Holacracy and Holacracy One, Holacracy is a framework for self-management, and a lot of the lessons here come right from that. So if you're already doing holacracy, this is going to be repeat. Although I hope I'll get to some nuances that might still help you improve how you do holacracy and facilitate your tactical meetings, particularly. So let's dive in. If you want to know more about holacracy in general, this is not the webinar for that. We have a different webinar that's just an intro to holacracy and how self-management works using the holacracy framework. So please check that out as well. It's separate from this. This one's specifically going to focus on concrete tips for leading virtual teams and meetings, whether or not you do self-management or holacracy or just management hierarchy. So I want to start by sharing, first let me say, as we go through this, I'd welcome your questions. So please feel free to type them into the chat or the Q&A. If you type them into the Q&A, we're more likely to see it, especially if there's a lot of chat, but you can try typing it into the chat as well. And feel free to use the chat as well to share insights or comments or anything you like with others in the webinar. With that said, welcome everyone. Let's jump in. So I want to start by sharing a glimpse of what painful meetings sometimes look like to me, or some of the qualities of them. And then I want to contrast that for you with some of how we've learned to do it in holacracy and in my company. So often in painful meetings, you see agendas built in advance. In fact, this is often considered a best practice in the conventional world, right? Build your agenda in advance, circulate it to everyone that's going to be at the meeting, decide what you should talk about, right? That happens a lot. You also end up with agenda items being topics to discuss, right? And then everybody shows up with anything they have around that topic. You might see an agenda item like our new website project. And then everyone in all different roles shows up and says, hey, well, what do I want to discuss? What should we discuss around the new website? So you see topics to be discussed in general become your agenda items. And often you end up then with those discussions dragging on, right? There's not a clear goal other than satisfy everyone in the room. So you don't really know when you're done with the item, so you just talk. And often the discussions go on and on and on. And that means you naturally spend most of your time on the first few agenda items, right? You end up spending a lot of time with whatever happens to show up first, and then you start getting squeezed for time, and you start racing through some other ones, or you just run out of time and don't get to many of your agenda points. And when you do get decisions, which itself can be somewhat rare, but when you do get decisions, they're often pretty vague. I've seen many of these meetings where everyone leaves with some sense of what we decided, but everyone has a different sense of what we decided. And often people have a different sense of who is going to do what, right? So you end up with just a lack of clarity out at the other end. So often you have limited follow through after the meeting, right? You don't really leave with a really clear idea of who is gonna do exactly what, right? It ends up being more about the talking and the dialogue and the consensus seeking than about the actual clear results and changing things after the meeting. So let me share an alternative. And I'm going to go through now another set of bullets, which is a contrast to each of these. And the first is, instead of building your agenda in advance, each agenda item is a tension, not a general topic to discuss, but one person's tension. And it's brought up right there in the meeting. Oops, sorry, right there in the meeting, not in advance. Right, so this is how we build agendas in a meeting process in Holacracy called a tactical meeting, which I'll tell you a bit more about as we go. But we start the meeting with a rough framework. We have a check-in, a chance for everyone to kind of get present and connect, and then we get right to, let's build our agenda. And we build it on the fly in the meeting. And when somebody adds an item to the agenda, it's not just a topic to discuss, it's I feel tension about something. And we define tension as the feeling you get when there's a gap between where we are and where we could be. So if you sense a potential for something to be better in your work, you're sensing a tension. We might call that a problem. We might call it an opportunity. It can be frustrating. It can be exciting. None of that really matters for this purpose. It's just, I sense something that could be better, that could be different. That's a tension. So you add an agenda item for your tension. And that makes you the agenda item owner. So it's not a topic to discuss owned by everybody. It's one person sensing a tension. All right, one person says there's something in the way of my work or something that could be better for my work. And this has an interesting shift that happens. Often we stop talking about things that we think we should talk about, but no one has tension about. I see this often in typical meetings where somebody puts something on the agenda, which we build in advance because we think, hey, we should talk about that, right? It seems like the right thing to do, but that's all intellectual. When we really sense into it, though, we often find no one has any tension about that. We don't really need to talk about it. It's okay. So this helps us zero in on the things we really do want to talk about because there's something we feel like we need from the team to move forward in our work. It keeps us more grounded in the real practical tension and less in our head about what we think we should talk about. So we stop talking about a lot of things that we otherwise might. And then when we have this, this also enables a more focused way of resolving an agenda item, right? When we go into one person's agenda item, since we have one clear tension and one clear owner, we can turn to that owner and we can say, what do you need? Right? So we start agenda items this way. And then that person has space to make any requests they want from the team. What do you need to get your work done or to resolve this tension for you? And again, these are what I love about these techniques. Yes, we have a whole framework around this, Holacracy, but any team, anyone facilitating any meeting can start this tomorrow and make your meetings immediately better. Right? Don't build your agendas in advance, build them on the fly, and make it clear that an agenda item isn't just a topic, it's one person's tension. So if you have tension, don't worry about what anyone else adds to the agenda. Ignore everyone else, add your item for your tension. And then when we get into it, start by turning to that person, whoever's facilitating, and saying, what do you need? Give them space. And even that question is powerful, right? It tends to pull people into their need, into the request. What is it you actually need here? And it encourages somebody to speak from the I, not the we, not the what do we need to do, but what do I need to get my work done? And let me make a request of you. I find healthy meetings spend more time focusing on I and you than we. That's not to say they're not team-oriented or collaborative. They are, they're more so. Right? But the language used is less about we, which has a diffuse responsibility. There's not a clear owner. Often we decide what we should do, and then we doesn't do it. Right? I joke sometimes, we is a terrible worker. We assign a lot of things to we, and we doesn't do them. I said that in a client once, and it turned out there was somebody in the group named we. Thought I was talking about him for a minute. So instead of talking about we, I and you, right? I need this, right, from you, and let me make a request for that. Right? And it might be all of you, but even that's different, right? It's what do you need from each person? Let's get clear requests to meet your need. Right? And then this invites us now, the speaking from myself when it's my agenda item, from my tension, to tune into what is it I want to request. And this is a shift from the typical consensus seeking to make a request, make a clear request. We have a little card that helps with this in Holacracy. You can download this on our website if you'd like. And I see, yeah, there's a link there that my colleague Jen just shared. Thanks, Jen. This card, the facilitator's holding it. And it's think of it like a menu, right? You go into a restaurant and the waiter doesn't just come up to you and say, well, so what do you want to eat? Right? They give you a menu, they give you options. They say, okay, well, today we've got these choices for you. Think of this as a menu of your options for what you can request in a meeting. Right? And each one's handled a little bit differently. So the facilitator will often read these to the participant and hand the participant a card, right? Just like a waiter at a menu, so you can use it yourself to kind of get clear. What are the types of requests that I might want? And this forces somebody to get so much more concrete. So you leave the meeting with real actionable results because you've made real clear requests to get there. And so, for example, we might start by asking the person, well, tell us about your tension, sure, but then what do you want to request? Do you want somebody to get something done? It's the first one on the card here. Do you want somebody to get something done? And if so, let's get clear, who are you requesting that from, or what role on the team would do that? And then to whoever you're requesting it from, does that make sense to you? Would that serve your purpose, your role, your job in the team, whatever language you use for that, right? Does that make sense to you to take on that action or that project or outcome? Right? So you want somebody to get something done. And if so, great, you've got a clear result and you capture it in writing. Somebody in that meeting is writing this down so you can see it, ideally projected or on a board or on a shared screen so everyone can see it. Right? What is the action that person is signing up for, or what's the outcome they're going to achieve? We make a differentiation there. That comes from the methodology called GTD, or getting things done, which says differentiate your actions and your projects. And I'm not going to go into that in depth here, but we've done other webinars on that. If you want to look at our YouTube channel, you'll see some of those. I think we have another one coming up soon as well. And the best place to go for that is the source. That's David Allen's work. And the website, I believe it's gettingthingsdone.com. It's a personal productivity system. And one of the things we borrowed was just get clear. Are you asking for a one-time action, or are you asking somebody to work towards an outcome where they're going to figure out the steps to get there? We call that a project, action or project. Right? So that's one type of request. Another type of request you might make, though, is not that. Sometimes you're not wanting somebody to take an action later. You're saying, I need input right now. That's why I'm here in the meeting. I want input or information of some sort. Right? This might be, I want some brainstorming, give me your ideas, or it might be just concrete. I need the facts of the situation or the numbers behind something or whatever. So if you want information or input, make that request and then allow space for that if you're facilitating the meeting, right? Great, give space for that input. But watch out, this is where a lot of meetings get stuck. Somebody starts with just getting input, but then it slides into this consensus seeking, what should we do? Remember here, you have one owner for this agenda item, one tension you're trying to solve. So go back to that. After some input, if it starts veering off course, go back to that agenda item owner. Did that give you the input you need? Do you want to make another request? And let's make sure we get clear, concrete requests for any actions that might need to come out after the search for input. Sometimes it's the opposite, though. Sometimes, third one here, you want to share some input or data, right? You don't really want something from anyone else. You don't want them to take an action. You want them to know something. And then it's up to them what they do with it, right? Or maybe you want them to know something, and then you want to make another request for a specific action. Fine, but if your first step is, I want to share input, be clear. My request is for people to listen. I just want to share some information. Right? And great, allow space for that. And then when that person is done, move on. And remember, it doesn't matter if anyone else is satisfied completely with the discussion, just the agenda item owner. If someone else is not satisfied, they can add their own agenda item even in the middle of the meeting. And we'll get to it when we get to it. Right? So they can have their own agenda item because this agenda item is not about their tension, it's about the agenda owner's tension. So the focus here is solving one tension at a time as sensed by the agenda item owner. I like to think of this as taking turns. And that sounds simple, but if you've ever taught your kids how to take turns with a game or whatever, or a toy, that's not easy. That's a hard-won lesson for children. I find the same is often true for adults. It's just, for us, it's not taking turns with something concrete, like a toy or a game or whatever. It's taking turns with these abstract ideas we have. It's taking turns being heard or getting the team's attention on something. But it's still taking turns. And here it's taking turns solving our tensions. So our agenda is a list of whose turn is it when. And when it's your turn, great. The whole team's job is to help support you to get what you need. right? Help support you in getting your tension resolved, or at least any actions queued up that you need to resolve your tension, whatever requests you want to make. We're there for you to support you in that. And then when you're done, we're going to move to the next agenda item and the next person's tension, and they're going to get a chance. And if somebody has a new tension that comes up during it, they're not going to interrupt your turn. They're not going to grab the toy out of the other kid's hand. They're going to wait their turn by adding their own agenda item. Right? This is actually often really difficult. There's a discipline to this. And I find when people are new to this kind of discipline, it's painful sometimes. It feels constraining sometimes. And I'm sure it does for kids too, when you tell them, no, you can't have the toy right now. You need to wait your turn. But it tends to work better. And it tends to promote an environment where we can all have a voice and we can all be heard. Right? We all get a chance to take our turn when we respect other people's turn. So one tension at a time, sensed by one person, take turns. And on your turn, make a clear request to solve your need. Right? And that means when you're processing the request now, you're not into this consensus seeking. I call that, in most meetings, we fall into the tyranny of consensus. And this happens so often, especially in management hierarchies today, where we, ostensibly we have a boss, we have somebody that has this top-down authority, but in reality, we spend a lot of time in meetings trying to get buy-in from everyone involved. And I call that the tyranny of consensus because often everyone gets a voice, but nobody actually gets their voice integrated. Nobody gets to necessarily solve their tension. It's like a swamp where, sure, we all talk, but not much changes. What I'd rather have is a case where we're not looking for consensus, but everyone not only has a voice, they can actually drive change. They can actually get results. And that's what happens when you really shift to this taking turns and getting clear when there is something that we need to decide. Don't just go to the consensus seeking of what should we decide. Get clear who will make this decision. So it's kind of pulling up to a meta level. So when it comes up like, hey, we need to open a new training, we're in COVID land. When do we open our next in-person training? There's something, we're doing virtual trainings nowadays. When do we open our next in-person training? If that came up in one of these meetings, we wouldn't go to searching for consensus on when that should be. We'd go to, wait, what role do we have that has the authority to make that decision? Right? And then we'd give that role an action to go make the decision. And there might be other requests. It might be, and there might be expectations we want to go with that. I'll talk about them in a minute. But instead of just coming to consensus on an answer, we get clear on authority. And sometimes it's not clear who has the authority, in which case, great, now we know we need to get clarity. Instead of just getting to consensus, let's get clear what role should make the decision of when do we open our next in-person training. And do we want to expect anything from that role? Is there any input that role really should get before doing that? Let's get clear on decision-making authority instead of defaulting to consensus. And this is deeply empowering when you do this well. Instead of forcing everything to come to a meeting to get group buy-in, you use your meetings to get clear who decides what outside of meetings. And then at the end of all that, you end your agenda item with simply, did you get what you need? And when the agenda owner says, yep, I got what I need, you're done with that agenda item, check it off, move on to the next person's turn. I'm going to say a bit more about this consensus seeking to clarifying decision-making authority in upcoming slides here. But those are some basics. Let's drill in a little bit more. Let's look at some more factors of painful meetings. So often I see in painful meetings, you just kind of start talking about something, and part of it is surfacing information, and part of it is deciding what should we do about that, or processing, as I say. And these two all get conflated. We move back and forth. We're sharing updates. We're sharing metrics. But then we're right into talking about what do we do about it. And that's all intermingled together. That itself makes things take longer. But then on top of that, you often in most meetings I see today in conventional companies, there's a lot of focus on status updates. Right? And have you ever noticed that sometimes when people are giving a status update, the amount they talk is inversely proportional to the amount they've gotten done? In other words, the less progress they've actually made, the more likely they are to give a complex status report on their project and just talk about the complexity of it. It's almost like that makes us feel better for not moving forward, or maybe it hides the information in some way and makes it easier on us than actually just saying, I didn't get anything done this past month on that. Right? So often you give these general status updates and they take forever. Often the person facilitating this is the boss. So it's no wonder people are trying to look good, give their status reports. There's usually some power holder or leader or boss in the team. They're often the ones facilitating this meeting. And I mentioned requests before. When you even do get clear requests, there's often a conflation of making a one-time request, like go do this action or work towards this project or outcome once, versus setting a new expectation. Like, generally, will you do this every time you do this thing? Or can I count on you for this ongoing new function? Those often get kind of mingled together. And I'll talk about why that's bad in the next slide. So the challenge with that, though, is those are naturally very different levels of complexity you're dealing with. If you're asking somebody to take an action to do something once for you, it's much easier for somebody to consider and say yes to or no to than when you're asking them to sign up for a completely new way of working, or you're trying to change a process, right, which is a more complex systemic change. And when you do those all in the same meeting, you tend to do neither of them justice. You tend to spend too long talking about the quick changes and not enough time drilling into the systemic complexities of the more process-oriented changes, right? So here's an alternative to some of these functions. And we do this in Holacracy's tactical meetings. We see separate steps for surfacing and processing of information. And during the surfacing of information, we're pretty ruthless. This is not for discussing what to do. This is for sharing information to build a common picture. Right, so here's the framework we use for these meetings. We call them tactical meetings. We start with a little check-in, just a chance to kind of get present. I won't go into that in depth. But then we have these 3 steps we call surface data here: checklist review, metrics review, and project updates. During those steps, the rule is we are not taking any actions. We're not making any requests of anyone. We are only sharing information. We're only surfacing visibility. Right? And we do that by going through some regular checklists, things we do regularly. We just want a quick check or no check to verify, like, did we send our monthly marketing blast? Check or no check, right? Did we open our next training? Check or no check, right? It's really quick, binary, just verify visibility. And then metrics are kind of what they sound like, data points. But again, without discussing what to do, it's just, here's our revenue for this month compared to past months, see a trend. Here is our website traffic this month versus past. Whatever the metrics are that's relevant for the team. Right? It's just a quick review. Here's our data. Here's visibility about our shared world. And then when we get to project updates, we do things a little different. Instead of sharing status reports, the rule is only updates are allowed. In other words, what's different between last meeting and this meeting? Not what's the general status of the project, not all the complexities of your project. Just tell us what's changed between last meeting and this meeting. And depending on the team, you might do these meetings every week or every other week, sometimes less frequently, but whenever it's been since you last gave an update, what's new or different. And if nothing is new or different, just say no updates. And we'll save everyone a lot of time and pain listening to your big, long-winded status report, right? Just move on. If someone has tension about your no updates, well, they're going to bring that up when we build our agenda, which again, we'll do right there in that meeting, and then process through all of our tensions. But during this preamble, right, where we're surfacing data, before we build our agenda, it's just about sharing quick updates. What's changed since last meeting? And all of this is facilitated by a neutral facilitator, not by, if you have a boss in the team, not by the boss. It's somebody that is, in Holacracy, in our methodology, it's an elected role. Somebody's elected on the team just to hold space for these meetings, nothing else. I mean, they might have other roles as well, but in this capacity in the meeting, they're not there leading the team in any way. They're there just to hold space for a neutral process. It's like a referee. It's not the team captain. It's not the team cheerleader. They're not there to make sure the team moves forward. They're not there to cheer people on and encourage them. They're there for one goal, which is to be the referee. There's a rule structure to this, right? And there's one tension at a time, one person's turn at a time. They're there just to blow the whistle if somebody takes over and get us back to, nope, this person's tension, your space. Right? So it's a referee role, not a captain role, right? And it's especially relevant when we get into building our agenda and making requests. There's a little more need to kind of hold that space. And finally, when we do identify that what we need is not a one-time request, it's not, will you take this action or project? It's, Will you sign up for this new expectation on an ongoing basis? Right? Or it's a change to a process, something you want to expect to be different on an ongoing basis, not just once. We kick that into a different meeting process to resolve. It's called a governance meeting. And we're not going to go through that in depth in this. But Jen, would you share a link to our governance meeting page on our website? So if you want to dig in a bit more, you can. I also talk about that more in our general Holacracy intro webinar, if you want to check that out. And it doesn't really matter, even if you're not doing Holacracy, if you're still in a management hierarchy, fine. You can still use this tactical meeting process. You can use everything I'm saying here. And when you identify, what we really need here is a new expectation on an ongoing basis, not just a one-time action. You can then kick that to the boss to make a decision out of the meeting, and that boss can do that through any process that makes sense to them, right? You can call a meeting, you can get input, you can come to consensus if you want with people, or you can make an autocratic decision, whatever makes sense to you, but don't confuse that with the simple decisions of, does it make sense to you to take on this action when requested? Or, hey, is this outcome one that makes sense for you to work towards project? Or I need input, or I need to share data, right? Whatever, those are much simpler requests. When you get to, on my previous slide here, when you get to that last item on the card, is there something you'd like to expect on an ongoing basis? If that's what your request is, I want to expect something to be different regularly. That probably warrants a deeper process, and that's the one that we catch and we kick up to the next process we have, the governance process, to figure that out. Or at least whatever process you're using, Holacracy otherwise, remove it from your tactical triage. Tactical is fast-paced, ideally. It's about quick requests of each other. You can get through 20 or 30 agenda items often in an hour-long meeting if you do this process well. It's fast-paced, it's moving forward. And as soon as you stop to do a bigger thing that's changing the expectation structure, which really is changing the power structure of your team, that probably warrants a little bit more consideration. Kick that to a process that's meant for it. All right, great. And yes, we do post recordings of these webinars. I see that request. So if you've missed, I know I'm hitting you with a lot of information pretty quick. So yes, there will be a recording of this. And if you're watching the recording, that's great. We also do live ones if you want to come back and join us and ask some questions. And we will be saving the last, probably 15 minutes or so for Q&A here as well. So I'll come back to the questions that I've missed. Okay. Let me broaden now from just meetings and talk about how you empower outside of meetings, especially in today's world, right? We're in a new landscape now. I've heard from a lot of CEOs and founders lately who are still running a management hierarchy, but they've always run in-person teams. And now suddenly they're thrust into a virtual world. And that can be pretty disorienting. If you've been running in a virtual team, you probably know that virtual in many ways, I think, is harder and it requires more clarity. If you don't have clear expectations, it's difficult for people to just move forward and take action when they're isolated from their team more. A lot of management hierarchies that are in person make up for the lack of clarity that's often inherent in management hierarchy by just doing more management by walking around, right? They're in an office, everyone's there. They can kind of drop in on people if you're a manager or if you're a team member, you kind of have your team there. You can overhear conversations. You can just easily go drop in on people, have a talk. It's actually a lot harder virtually. It's more disruptive, right? When you just go and jump in and call someone or try to Zoom someone, it's just there's an overhead to that. There's a resistance I find people have to that, right? I noticed when I did run an in-person team, the number of people that just drop by my door or my desk was far higher than the number of people that actually call me or text me now that I'm in a virtual workforce. And there's just higher barrier, there's higher psychological resistance to this, right? And that means it's even more important that they don't need to, that you're not relying on meetings to get to all your decisions. And if you don't want to rely on meetings to get to all your decisions, you need clear expectations. People need to know what's theirs to own and lead, and they need to know what they can count on from whom. So they don't have to go to a meeting and call meetings or wait for meetings. I can't tell you the number of suddenly virtual teams right now that I think are probably spending a bulk of their time just waiting for meetings to get stuff done. And that's tragic, especially in the virtual world. Meetings are also harder virtually. I think you probably experience this, I would guess, most of you, right? Meetings they're more taxing. It's harder to sit around staring at a screen than it is to be there human to human contact. So if you have virtual meetings, it's even more important that you don't need them as much. And that's the irony. Good virtual meetings help reduce the frequency of virtual meetings. And that means you need real clear expectations. You need to know who to go to for what. To use a simple analogy, one of our companies in our network here that's using Holacracy, the founder told me before Holacracy, he's building a fast growth company, 100 employees or so, growing quickly. He said before Holacracy, he noticed it would take people a lot of time when they were new to the company to figure out who to go to for what. And this is an in-person company. It's even harder in the virtual world, right? It would take them months, he said, of being on the job to have some sense of who to go to for what they could expect from different people, who made which decisions. It took quite a while. He said what was remarkable to him after adopting a framework like Holacracy that focuses on clarifying expectations, he said what was so remarkable, the most remarkable thing for him was now people's first day of work, they could find who to go to for nearly any decision or any expectation they had anywhere in the company, right? They knew exactly where to go because all of that gets clarified and documented if you're doing Holacracy. And whether you're doing Holacracy or not, whatever approach you're using for management or self-management, if you want an empowered team, you need clear expectations and you need them to be documented. And I don't mean the kind of documentation that people ignore. When was the last time you went and looked up something in your job description? We don't use job descriptions because they're out of date and irrelevant. They don't make sense. They're not real clarity. They're fake clarity. They're the kind of clarity that gives us enough to think we can hire somebody, but then we ignore it once they start, which to me, I wonder, why are we hiring people with something that's not meaningful enough to actually use day to day? So you need the kind of documentation that's relevant and real and driven by the people doing the work, not something that comes from HR or top down from somebody's idea of what they think they need. Right? And real empowerment also requires boundaries, not just clear expectations, but you need to know what you can't do. Because if you don't know what you can't do, then you don't know what you can do without talking to anyone. Right? If you don't know what you really have to bring to a meeting, then you don't know what you don't have to bring to a meeting. Right? If you don't know your limits, you don't know your freedom. So this is the irony. A lot of people that I see wanting more empowerment on teams, they focus on getting rid of boundaries, getting rid of policies that are in the way, which is great. I'm all for getting rid of policies that are in the way, get rid of bureaucratic structure, but that's not enough. You have to replace it with real, meaningful, clear structure. If you just go to your team tomorrow and say, good news, guys, you're all empowered. We're going to throw out all clarity, throw out all boundaries, right? There's no longer anything you can't do. People know that's a lie. You don't get an empowered team that way. You get a lot of people who know there's really something they shouldn't do. So they're going to spend a lot of time and energy trying to figure out the boundaries in your head and not a lot of time acting empowered within the boundary. So if you want an empowered team, you need people that know their boundaries, that know what they can't do so that they know what they can do. You need clarity. You don't need to just tear away bureaucratic structure. You need to replace it with agile, lightweight, real structure, real clarity that tells people where the boundaries are. Here's an example of Holacracy, and you can do this in a management focus on these things. It's just harder than a framework. But you can do it by getting clear roles. So Holacracy is a role-based system. This is one of the roles I work with. We have 2 people filling this role right now. Tara is the one that normally fills it, but Matt's doing it while Tara's out on maternity leave. Right? So we know this is all stored in a software tool called Glassfrog. Jen, could you give a link to glassfrog.com there, just so people have that? Software tool that tracks all of this and lets us update it over time. Each role has a purpose that tells me, why does this role exist? Right? What are we here to achieve in this role? Gives people the why, makes the work more meaningful, and invites them to be creative. Right? Invites them to go beyond just the specific tasks, specific expectations, get creative to figure out how to achieve this why. And then I'm going to jump down here to accountabilities. This tells everyone on the team, what can you expect from this role? It tells the person filling this role, here's what I need to manage for the team. Right? We also have these things called domains. This tells the role, what do you control? What is yours to control on behalf of the team? So this role controls our blog posts, right? Produced by the team, we call it Circle, the resources circle. This is the team that creates all the resources out there for Holacracy and people using our methodology. This gives a lot of clarity here. It tells everyone else, here's what this role controls. Don't mess with their area. This is their territory. Tells them, here's what I can expect of them. I can go task the role to do any of these things. And it tells the role, here's why I exist and what I want to get creative around. Right? Now, to make this real, this clarity isn't something that happens once up front. It's something that we evolve regularly. Every team is holding regular governance meetings to evolve the clarity of their roles. Right? So this is living, breathing structure. This is not structure that is created one time and imposed top down. This is structure that's coming from every team. But again, even if you're in a management hierarchy, you will benefit from giving people clarity of structure, expectations, and boundaries. You just got to make it real. Make sure it's updated and living. And you can tie this back to the meeting process. Going back to your meetings, when you identify you need a change to the expectations, clarify your roles. Right? When you need to know who makes the decision of when do we start in-person trainings again after COVID, get clear. Some role needs to be accountable for deciding things like that. Right? Make it clear what's the role that owns that. So then that person can be empowered and go make the decision outside of a meeting. And if you want them to be expected to go talk to other people, make that clear in the expectations. What we do in Holacracy, and I think this is a really powerful stance, even in a management hierarchy, is take a stand that says when you're filling a role, you've got a purpose to achieve, you've got accountabilities to enact. When you fill a role, you have the power to make any decision or take any action anywhere in the company to get your job done, as long as you don't mess in some other role's domain. If it's another role's domain, you need to check in with them. But other than that, you don't need a meeting. You don't need to build consensus. You don't need to bring anything to a meeting to lead your role. You have the power outside of the meeting to lead your role. And again, in a virtual environment, this is even more important because the overhead for meetings is higher. So when you have this level of clarity, you can take that stand. You have the freedom to take any action, the power to make any decision anywhere in the company to get your purpose met or your accountabilities done. Just don't mess in another role's domain without their approval, without checking in with them and making sure you're not going to cause harm. If you take that stance, it then creates pressure on the team to get good, clear roles because you've given people a lot of freedom, and a lot of freedom to lead. And with that freedom, you're going to need clarity of boundaries, which are domains here, and clarity of responsibilities. What do you expect of them? And if you give people that level of freedom, you need the responsibility to balance it. So that's a bit about how we work here. I want to end or wrap up by looking at the overall paradigm this brings in. And share a metaphor to look at this different way of controlling a company. So here are two control paradigms, to use my metaphor, that we see in flow through a city, flow of traffic in this case. We see stoplights and we see traffic circles as two different paradigms for controlling flow. In the stoplight example, well, you know, before I go there, let me ask a little quiz question here. There's been research on these. One of these control paradigms has been proven to be more efficient. It lets more cars through in the same amount of time. Anyone have a guess? Just type it into the chat for me. Is it traffic lights or traffic circles? Which one lets more flow through in the same amount of time? Which one is more efficient? What do you think? Traffic circle or traffic light? Yeah, the circles. There's been many studies on this now. Traffic circles are far more efficient than stoplights. There's been another set of studies, though, that look at safety. They found there are actually far less accidents in one of these two paradigms. Which one do you think has far less accidents per car moving through? Which one is a safer paradigm? Is it traffic lights or traffic circles? Yeah, you might think traffic lights, but that's actually not true. All of the studies have consistently found traffic circles are safer, at least all the studies I've seen. Traffic circles, if you look at it as a rate of per car moving through, all the research I've seen has said traffic circles have less accidents per car moving through. So they're both more efficient and safer. Now, which one's harder to drive in? Right? Which one is more difficult? Which one requires more of the driver? Right? I'd say also traffic circles. Yeah, right? Traffic circles require more. You have to be present. You have to coordinate in real time with every other driver in that circle. Traffic lights are far easier. You get to defer your authority to an external agent. You get to wait to be told what to do and when to do it, when to stop and when to go. You give up your power to an external authority that manages you, that tells you what to do and when. It's not as efficient, it's not as safe, it's not as effective overall, but it's easier, it takes less of you, the driver. If you want to shift, I found it nerve-wracking. The first time I started driving a lot in Europe, which has far more traffic circles than the US, it was nerve-wracking because they're harder to drive in. They take more. There's a learning curve for sure. But when you climb that learning curve, when you figure out how to lead while everyone else is leading too, when you figure out how to own your autonomy, own your authority, not defer it to an external agent, but coordinate in real time, consciously with everyone else involved, that's a big shift, and it's powerful, and it works better. Now, which one of these looks more like a modern typical company? Which control paradigm is more close to the one that we see in most companies today? I'd say it's also traffic lights, right? It's the left. It's most of the companies we see today, most conventional approaches to management, they are using a control system that is more empower managers who then often micromanage. They tell people when to stop and when to go, or the equivalent. It's much harder to be an empowering boss, to be the kind of leader that creates clarity, that gives people the freedom to lead within the boundaries, that tells people, you don't need my approval. You don't even need to come to the meeting. Here's your role, lead it. Here are the boundaries. This is what I mean by self-management is a natural extension of good management. A good manager is not one that micromanages. It's one that creates clarity. It's one that creates clear boundaries and then empowers people to lead within them. When you do that really, really well, what you eventually find is a process can do that even better. A framework can give people empowerment even better than I as a fallible human can, right? So self-management I see as a natural extension of management. But it starts, whether you're using a framework like Holacracy or just a homegrown approach to self-management or a management hierarchy, it starts by recognizing which paradigm do you want to be in. Do you want to be in the paradigm where people give up their authority up the management hierarchy or to the group through consensus and wait to be told, wait for everything to be approved? Or do you want the kind of control paradigm that expects more of people, but also gives them more power to do it and allows them the context, the freedom, the structure to be able to self-lead, to coordinate in real time? And which one of those will work better in a virtual environment, do you think? When everyone is just in their home office and there's less ability to coordinate, right? Which one is going to work better? My belief is in most contexts, maybe not all, but in most contexts, the right-hand side, the paradigm that says, we're going to give you a structure within which you're free to lead. We're going to create clarity of boundaries and expectations so that within them, you can lead. And when we do have meetings, we're not going to use the meetings to be a consensus fest. We're going to use the meetings to give you space to lead your role by making requests. What do you need? Right? What do you want to request from others? And we're not going to come to consensus. We're going to get clear. What are the actions and projects we're going to take? If we need to change something in the structure or the process itself, great. We're going to have a separate space to do that digs deep. That allows us to really change and add expectations to roles or add new roles into the team or whatever we need to do. All right. So I hope some of this has left you with at least something you can take and use today or tomorrow in your real team, in your real environment. You may not be able to fully adopt a self-management framework like Holacracy, but you can still benefit from a lot of the things I think we've learned over the years in how to run an effective team, even in a management hierarchy. All right, great. Cool. Mind blown. Well, I'll take that. Thank you, Cirrus. I see that in the chat as a note to end on. We're going to take the last 15 minutes to move into Q&A. And of course, if you want to dig more into our framework for doing this, there's a ton more on holacracy.org. There's resources, there's videos, there's my book, of course, Holacracy you can buy at most bookstores. There's a lot more out there on this. But let's start with some Q&A. So if I've missed your question, I'm sorry, I'm going to answer whatever ones I can. Feel free to share it again in the Q&A or the chat if I miss it. All right, let's see. So let me queue up our first question. So I see a question I may have already answered, I'm not sure. The question is, why is having an agenda built in advance in a meeting a bad thing? So I think I answered part of this, but I want to just echo a couple points to drive this home. When you build an agenda in advance, it tends to encourage people to talk about what they think they should talk about. Often you end up with people adding agenda items to manage their image or their reputation. They add something because it looks good to talk about it, or because they just think intellectually, this is what a good team should talk about, or this is what we should talk about in theory. It tends to get people in their head. When you show up in a meeting and you ask, what are your intentions that you're feeling now, it tends to drop people into their body and their emotions. I think those are more reliable places to sense worthwhile things to talk about in your meeting. We can use our heads. I'm not saying leave your head behind, but leave your head to help you solve for what you're feeling. Start with, what am I noticing in my body? Where do I feel tense, and what's that about? Right? Where am I kind of clenching some? Or in your emotions, where do I feel some frustration or some excitement? Those are both clues to something you might need here, right? So those are tensions. Start in your body, start in your heart, start in your emotions. Use your mind to help solve and intellectually figure out what to do about those things. Don't just talk about things because you think you should. Building things in advance tends towards that. You get distanced from the real tension. Often, the other side of that is true too. You don't talk about the things then in the meeting that people actually feel real tension about. I've done this earlier as I experimented with this. I'd walk into a team, they'd have an agenda built in advance, I'd facilitate their meeting, we'd go through that, and then I'd say, all right, now what are you actually feeling tension about that we didn't just talk about? And the discussion that would then follow would be far more worthwhile than the one that came because we built the agenda in advance. Not to say it's all useless. Sometimes people add real tensions on their agenda in advance. That's fine. And let me be clear, I'm not saying never make your own list of things you want to bring to a meeting in advance. I do. I have a list in my own task management system. I have a list of things I want to talk about in the next meeting. But we're not circulating them as a team, right? I have my list, and when I get to the meeting, we build the agenda, I look at my list, I add them to the agenda, so does everyone else, and then we move through our agenda. That also forces me to do a consciousness check. When I add it to the agenda, I don't just automatically do it. I ask, do I still feel tension about this? And sometimes the answer is no. You know, when I would have added it to the agenda the day or two before the meeting, I felt tension, but somehow it's resolved, so why waste the time talking about it? And so those are some of the reasons. I hope that gives some sense of that. All right, so let's see, another question. When someone's agenda is to share information, so when you get into that meeting again and you say, I want to share information, somebody might ask a clarifying question. They might ask questions. Should we allow that? So I love this. So the agenda owner says, I just want to share some information. They do. Someone says, hey, I have a question. And you're facilitating. What do you do? The principle here, which is more powerful than the specific answer, is about who controls the space for this agenda item. It's not you as the facilitator, it's the agenda item owner. So as facilitator, I'm going to defer to the agenda item owner. I'm going to ask them, is it important for your attention to get questions? Do you want questions or not? It's up to the agenda item owner. And this is the principle here is, remember, it's one tension at a time, owned by the agenda item owner. And it's their space. The facilitator is just the referee to help them. It's their space. So defer back to them. Do you want questions? And try to take the social pressure off of them. It's not take questions just to satisfy your colleagues. I might even remind the agenda item owner. If anyone has their own tension, they can have their own agenda item. So you don't need to entertain questions for their sake. Do it for your sake. Be selfish. And it's not selfish because what you're really doing is just speaking for your tension. That's actually a healthy thing to do. It's standing in your eye and inviting everyone else to stand in their eye. I will maintain there damn well is an I in team. There's a lot of I's in team. What makes a team is a bunch of I's. It's a bunch of people standing clear. Here's my tension. And then it's connecting with you or with everyone else on your team to help you solve your tension. So stand in your eye. What do you need? Right? And if you're facilitating, defer back to that. It's about the agenda item owner and trust that everyone else will do the same. They'll add their own agenda item if they have a tension. Right? And we'll collaborate together to help solve all of our tensions one at a time. So if it helps you solve your tension to take some questions, then by all means do it. If it's important to me that everyone understand what I just shared, maybe I want to allow them to ask some clarifying questions. I often do. When I come to a meeting, I want to share something like, do you want or questions? Well, that say, yeah, it's actually really important to me. You got what I just shared. So please ask questions if you have them. Okay, let me move on to another one. How do you balance the time and prioritize agenda tensions, right, to create movement in the group? And when I do that in the moment, like how do I prioritize time for each agenda item? So I do simple mental math. How many minutes do we have left in our meeting? I'm holding that sacred. We're not going to run overtime. So we have so many minutes left, divided by how many agenda items are left. That's our average time per agenda item. So if we have, half an hour left in the meeting and I have 5 agenda items left, okay, we've got 6 minutes per agenda item. And I'll even tell people that. I'll frame it at the beginning. Okay, we got about 6 minutes per agenda item. Let's go. What do you need? First item. And when we get closer to the end of their average time block, I warn them. I say, all right, you've got a couple minutes left. Do you have any last requests? And if we get to the end of their time block, I can cut them off. Now, I make a judgment call here. If it feels like we're almost done, maybe I'll give them an extra minute and trust we'll make it up because someone else will be under time. That's fine. But I am steering towards the roughly average minutes per agenda item. And it is okay to cut someone off. The important thing here is we get through every agenda item on time, every time. And what that does is give everyone a fair space for their attention to have a turn, to make a request, right? You might not get everything met, but that's fine. You can make more requests outside of the meeting. Remember, if you're doing this well, you don't need to bring everything to a meeting. So if you have a request you don't get a chance to make in the meeting, just go outside the meeting and request something of someone. Go directly to them, call a meeting with just them, send them an email, whatever you need to do. So I'm balancing by average time and making sure we get through every agenda item. Give each agenda item its due time, steer towards that if I can, maybe give a little extra, some will go a little shorter, cut people off when I have to and invite them to continue solving their tension outside of the meeting. But this is about everyone getting an even chance for their tension, for every tension they have, get a chance to make requests. Yeah, okay, I've also seen a question, have you used this meeting approach with not just a core team, but teams that may meet monthly to bring together a wide range of staff from various projects? Yes, and it works great. So I love this process, especially for things like that. Whenever you need an efficient meeting, I find this works better. I used to do this well before I did Holacracy consulting. I did something similar to this with just clients even. I ran a consulting company, and when my clients would be there, I'd run this process to deal with issues between the client and my company. And it worked great. I love it. All right. So here's another question. What about someone having a tension that is not directly related with the objective of the meeting, right? So here, what I do is I'm clear on which roles are invited. And as long as they're serving the purpose of their role, it's up to them what's relevant. But I do make sure they're in role. So what I do is, and it might be all the roles in a specific team. A lot of these meetings will just be every role in this team. So maybe we have a website team that manages my company's website. And we might do a tactical meeting of our website team, and any role on the website, we have several roles that work on our website team, is invited. And then I check. If I hear something I don't think is relevant, I ask the person, which role of yours? And can you point to which purpose on your role or accountabilities on your role that you're trying to serve here? And as long as they have an answer to that, it's not me to judge it. I'm not policing this. I'm just asking the question. Often what they'll realize is, oh, actually, that's not any of my roles in this meeting. So I'll take it to another meeting, or I'll take it offline one-on-one. And that keeps you focused. So make sure they're serving one of the roles that was invited to the meeting. And that might be every role in a team, or in the case of the previous answer I gave, it might be a cross-team meeting, and that's fine too. Just be clear. We're inviting this list of 10 roles to be represented in this meeting. As long as you're serving the purpose of one of these 10 roles, you're welcome to bring any tension. If you're not serving the purpose or expectations, accountabilities on one of these 10 roles, then you're not welcomed in this meeting, but that's not to say don't process your tension, just take it somewhere else. Call a different meeting for that. Right. So that's one way we keep this really focused. Again, one of the major aspects of Holacracy is just role clarity. And you can do that even outside of Holacracy. When you have real good role clarity, it enables so much focus in so many other ways. Okay, let's see. So I see some questions here about Holacracy, which we probably don't have time for, but I'll invite you to post them on our Holacracy community of practice, which I see right there. Thank you, Jen just shared that, read my mind. We have online forums where you can post Holacracy related questions and get answers. So please consider any Holacracy questions there. And you can also come to our intro webinar and ask your questions in that as well. Those tend to have a lot of people in them, so apologies if I don't get a chance to answer every question in those, but feel free to try. And then of course, reach out to us. If you want to talk about Holacracy more broadly, send us an email. We're always happy to talk about how we can bring some of these techniques to your team. We don't have to bring all of Holacracy to help organizations, we often end up starting with one piece of it, like role clarity, adding another piece, like those tactical meetings, and then another. So there's an incremental approach to add more of these structures as they're useful to your team. Please feel free to reach out if we can do some good for you there. We also have a network of certified Holacracy coaches all over the world that can help with that. So we can also put you in touch with somebody. And finally, we have deeper trainings. If you want to get your feet wet and try this more before you jump in, that's fine. Consider one of our trainings. We do them online now. And you'll see the next one of those. Jen, did you already share? If you haven't, actually, Jen, give us another link there to our events page on our website so you can see upcoming trainings. The next one starts in just a couple of weeks in August. They run over 3 weeks. They're a few hours or so, a couple times a week for 3 weeks roughly. You'll see the full schedule online. So it's not overwhelming for a virtual offering. It's spread out, but it does dive deep, and there's simulations. You'll go through meetings, you'll experience them, you'll learn how to facilitate them. So there's a lot in those trainings that will take you deeper into this as well. All right, and with that said, we're just about at the end of our time block. So I hope this has been useful. Please, if you would, if there's anything you want to share in the chat as just final closing, I'd love to hear either what was your biggest takeaway, or was this useful to you? Any feedback you might want to give. I'm going to stick around and read the chat here before I leave, but I'd love to see any final reflections that you want to share in the chat. And any impacts this had on you. What was the impact of hearing all this? What's your takeaway? What's this mean to you? So thanks for joining. If you want more, again, check out our website and check out our trainings or our offerings, or reach out to us. Hope to hear from some of you down the road. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great day. Enjoy.